we are Data Labs India, based in India. So we provide solution, software solution, energy management, and also supply chain management. So we are happy sponsors of this event. I take this as an opportunity to thank organizers and then the participants to make this happen. So I take a great pride in inviting our keynote speaker, Dr. Peter Compo. We are very fortunate to have him on board for this event. Despite all his busy schedules, he accepted to join our event and give a keynote lecture. So thank you, Dr. Peter, for joining all the way from various places. So I just let me give a quick introduction. Dr. Peter Compo is a seasoned leader with 25 plus years of experience, or maybe more, in holding the roles of research and development, marketing, supply chain, and with a PhD in chemical engineering. He specialized in adaptive systems and developed an emergent approach, and eventually emergent approach to the strategy is a powerful combination of theory and practice. After holding a wide range of leadership roles and DuPont for more than 25 years, he draws his experience and he is trying to help organizations with his approach. I had a book written by Dr. Compo, so I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Peter. So thank you, sir. You are kind enough to join us, and I'm very happy to introduce you and also eager to hear you directly. So thank you, Dr. Peter. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you for the nice introduction, and I'm happy I could participate in this summit. How's my sound? Okay, still?
It's okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes, clear for everyone. I guess I'm going to share. Let me pull up. How did it end up there? Okay, and I'll pull up a few things. And everybody can see this okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So I decided to turn my talk into 10 strategy improvements we can make now. And they're all based on the Emergent approach, that book, the theory and practice of that book. But I thought it might be fun to do a top 10 list. I think will be very beneficial to practitioners. And here's the list. I'm only going to flash it right now. Clearly, in the short time I have here, I'm not going to be able to give tutorials on all of this. My aim is to inspire some thinking and give you some ideas. So I'm going to be going very fast. I was already introduced, but I want to mention one other thing about myself, and that is that my work is not only in strategy, but also in theoretical biology and in creativity and innovation. I'm also a musician. And the reason I mention this is because I think my work is really informed by all of these areas of innovation and creativity. And that while people might be surprised because I'm a musician and think about creativity all the time, that my strategy methods are quite rigorous and engineering-like. And maybe we should say that creativity comes from rigor and that's the reason for it. So anyway, let's dig in. I'm just going to say a few things before I get to the top 10 items. The Emergent approach, which you saw the book, is a new theory and a modified practice of strategy. It's based on complex adaptive systems of creativity and innovation. Here's some visual ways to see the approach. And we're going to talk about several of these several of these items. But before we do, I want to lay a little bit of a foundation, especially about this one, an influence diagram, because it's very core to the theory and it keeps coming back over and over again. So what is an influence diagram? What it is it is a way to reverse engineer. It's a way to understand what influences an outcome that you want. So I refer to outcomes generally as aspirations. If you work backwards from an aspiration, whatever it is, goal, vision, mission, big goal, small goal, as you work backwards and reverse engineer what it takes to do that, all the decisions and choices you're faced with grow quite quickly. And so what we're trying to do is connect outcomes at what they call the global level in complex systems to the action and decision level, which we call the local level, what you can do. And that's what's really key about this. We distinguish what really matters, the outcome you want, from what you're able to actually do, the choices and actions you're actually able to take. So let's look at a simple example. And and I want to mention, this is why my logo is this influence diagram shape. It's such an important concept. So a simple example, and you can get all the details in the book. What if you wanted to launch a bike shop? If you wanted to work backwards from all the things you have to find all the things you have to do to launch a bike shop, how would that look? Well, I'm going to go quick and point out that there's many, many things that would happen. And you get this characteristic shape. And you get on the left-hand side a whole bunch of decisions and actions you've got to take. And from this, we can learn something very interesting. Number one, you're faced with many choices for a given outcome. Number two, there's a time delay between when you take the action and when you find out whether it was a good action or not. Sometimes in business, this can be years. There's always unknown and uncontrollable influences, and what matters most is the least actionable. Collectively, I call these the killer problems of change and innovation. And while people know this intuitively, I don't know that it gets baked into strategy work enough. And this is where we run into strategy. Strategy is for how we deal with this mess. A strategy is to give guidance and coherence to all the decisions and choices that have to be made. And the other key element here is that the strategy is going to be directed towards the bottleneck. And you can think of the word bottleneck as a barrier, an obstruction, blockage, impediment, whatever word you want to use. But what it is what's keeping you from getting to the aspiration that you want, your goal, directly, and what has to be fixed to get that to happen. So with this short introduction, let's get to the top 10, and let's start with the logical one. What is a strategy? So number one, define strategy as the central rule. So here's that little triad again, aspiration, bottleneck, strategy. Well, what exactly is a strategy? I derive in the book that strategy is a central rule of a strategy framework. We'll talk about that in a minute. Designed to unify all actions and decisions around busting the bottleneck to achieving aspirations. So the real key here is that strategy is a rule. Let's look at a very simple example. Say the aspiration of a business was to raise gross margin by 12% in 2 years. The bottleneck in this particular case is the marketing is used to getting products and services they want because it's been a growth business. And no one's allowed to push back for fear of being called not centric, customer focused or customer centric. So what would be a strategy in this case to bust that bottleneck? Well, a simple one is launch fewer products, but start spending more time on designing them for lower cost. So the rule, and this rule would affect R&D, it would affect product development, it would affect everybody, sales, operations, and everybody be involved with that. This is a central rule that gives guidance to everyone on how to attack this bottleneck. So that's the strategy. What about a strategy framework? This is number 2. We have to differentiate between strategies and strategy frameworks. A strategy is one component of what is a strategy framework that includes all of these other dimensions and elements. And everybody's familiar with this. Often it's called a strategic plan. And if you'd like a short version of explanation of these details, there's an article in Strategy magazine that goes into a simple example and gives definitions of all of these terms. However, most people are very familiar with these terms. So, what other definitions of strategy are there? Take a quick look at this. Strategy themes. No, they're not strategies at all. Strategy themes are goal themes, really. Roger Martin, set of interlinked choices. Yes, it's true, but that's not enough. Strategy is what makes the choices coherent. Porter's integrated, forward-looking. True for all components of the framework, not just the strategy. But the biggest problem is that many people consider the entire framework to be the strategy, not distinguishing between the strategy and the overall framework, i.e. the strategic plan. And we see this all over the place, right? How many strategies have you seen that look something like this? Big visions, big missions, goals, maybe a bunch of other things, and then a bunch of lists of strategic initiatives and plans and sub-goals and so forth. And I wrote few here. Sometimes this goes on for pages and pages. Sometimes this is in the form of these strategic themes, marketing theme and an operations theme and so forth. But the truth is they're not strategy themes, they're goal themes. It's really ironic that the component most often missing in a strategy framework in any field I've been involved with, not just business, is a strategy. Now, lists are needed for plans, tactics, metrics, and initiatives and sub-goals and things. They're just not needed for the strategy. So here's that strategy: launch fewer new products, but spend more time for lower cost. That would inform all of these other activities. So where does strategy come from? We already talked about it a little bit. Number 3, suggestion of improvement. Make the bottleneck the magic path to strategy. I'll just reiterate it again. So here's our triad. Usually we'll want to think, well, we'll go right from the aspiration to the strategy. How are we going to solve it? How are we going to solve our goal? But no, go from the bottleneck. And this is very intuitive for people. There's I forgot the author, but a book called "The Obstacle is the Way." The obstacle is the way. Or how many times have we heard a problem well defined is half solved? It's the same idea. You have to define what's in the way to get at strategy. And this is why the triad is so important, and why the aspiration, bottleneck, strategy elements, components are so core to the strategic framework. Bottlenecks come in all kinds of flavors, not just assets. Take a look at this list. Think about your experiences about how many times what's in the way of progress in a business is cultural or methods, or that the business is too complex or procedures are too complex. or that people don't follow the rules that exist. This is really the way to get at the strategy that's needed to meet the aspiration. And it sometimes takes a great amount of diagnosis to find out what really is in the way, because it may not be common knowledge. It may be hidden. It may be dangerous to talk about what's really in the way. Alignment, common language. So I think this is a very, very key point of strategy. And I find that sometimes great progress can be made just by getting everyone involved to focus on this bottleneck question. It really is the magic path to finding strategy. Let's look at a few more examples of triads. You could take a look here. I'll let you just give it a quick look. I think it's really fun to compare Henry Ford, to Tesla 100 years later. They both had the issue of creating a large-scale automotive adoption. Henry Ford, internal combustion, and Elon Musk, electric. And Henry Ford's is really a classic case of his bottleneck was that cars were built by craftsmen and parts were not standardized and dimensions were not standardized. And craftsmen would hammer and fix things until they fit. And there was no way he could mass produce that way. So his mass production became the solution to this craft dominance. But his strategy was he would never allow options and style effort to get in the way of what it took to engineer for pricing and throughput. So for example, famous story, my customers can have the car in any color they want, the Model T, of course, as long as it's black. He refused to give people the option of style of different colors because that slowed things down. The famous assembly line, few people know this, that actually it only came in 5 years after the Model T was launched. And it was part of his process of focusing on eliminating craft's dominance. So then I watched a short video of Elon Musk being asked 100 years later, what made you succeed when other electric car companies have failed? And what did he say? He said, we're an engineering company. He didn't talk about style. He didn't talk about markets. He didn't talk about business models. He talked about going onto the shop floor, the factory floor, and looking for so many opportunities to reduce cost and increase throughput. And I think there's a wonderful parallel between the two, 100 years apart. I want to point out these theories apply to anything. Here's a very famous guy here in the States that helps people get out of debt, like a personal finance guru. And he has this strategy of pay off small versus high rate loans first. Very counterintuitive, but it's a beautiful rule. And it's because the bottleneck is people are overwhelmed. He wants them to get some progress going, not just focus on high interest rates. Okay, let's move on then to strategy framework design. And the key word here is agile parallel design. But I want to prime a little bit by talking about something I believe is a major confusion about strategy and strategy design in general. And that's our number 4 improvement. It's to accept that strategy is always both deliberate and emergent. How many times have we heard that deliberate strategy and emergent strategy are opposite? Well, I'm saying there's no such thing as this dichotomy, and that we have to get past that to understand strategy better than we do. So what is an emergent approach? What does this word really bring us to? Does it mean bottoms up versus top down design? No, not at all. Emergence doesn't mean that just the local, it doesn't mean that all the lower level people decide what to do and the leader just sits there and watches. No, the leader is just as important as everyone else. And in fact, this is bottoms up, top down, sideways, every way. It doesn't matter where the ideas come from. I already mentioned it, emergent strategy. There is no real such thing as an emergent strategy. There's emergent approaches to strategy, and strategy development is an emergent process. Only run experiments. The idea in an emergent approach means we can't decide anything, and so we'll only run experiments and discover what to do and discover what's going on. I think running experiments as a strategy might be very valuable in many cases, but we can't say that that is the definition of an emergent approach. That would be a specific example of a strategy where things are very uncertain. How about everybody works without direction? It's nonsensical. It would have no meaning for an organization to have no strategy of any type with some direction of some type. Even running experiments requires some direction. Running experiments requires people to know what kind of experiments make sense. How much resources do they have available to them? Where are they allowed to run those experiments? When? How long do they have to take? These are strategy questions. And then the opposite of a deliberate approach. I'm going to explain no. Here's the one we're looking for. An emergent approach is one that's in tune with the behavior of complex adaptive systems and anything that needs strategy is a complex adaptive system. People are complex adaptive systems, and so anything involving people generally is going to be emergent. Let's unpack this a little bit. So what is a strategy framework for? A strategy framework's goal is to give a North Star, as we say, to give the guidance you need for making decisions and taking actions as you go from the current state to the desired future state that you're looking for. As you walk down the road and you're faced with choices and decisions. Let's look at 2 businesses. The first one has a goal of growing a new market. That's their desired future state, their aspiration. Their strategy is because they believe the future is clear and that they have grown in new markets several times, they don't think they need to create a new concept. And they're going to say our strategy is to stick with what has worked in the past. Contrast that with another business. Well, they see the future as much foggier, much cloudier, the fog of war. And they know that the arrow to the desired future state is not going to be straight, and most likely it's going to diverge into other places in other ways. So their goal is also grow in a new market, but because the future is foggy, they're going to run pilots and they're going to give freedom to the organization to discover what should be done. Their framework's likely to change much more than the first business. because of all the uncertainty. But here's the issue. In both cases, the outcomes emerge from the actions and decisions guided by a deliberate design. What's different between the two is that the design is different. In one case, it's very constrained. We know how to do this. We're going to do it like we did in the past. That's not deliberate strategy. Yes, it's deliberate, but it's what makes it unique is that it's highly constrained. People aren't allowed to just do it, run experiments and discover what to do. In the second case, business two, oh, I'm sorry for the typo. This is business two. The strategy is not as constrained. The people are not as constrained, but it is just as deliberate. It's a deliberate design to run pilots and give freedom to people to discover what should be done. So there's no difference here. They're both deliberate and they're both emergent. And they're especially both emergent because the people on the left, the business on the left, also can have things go wrong too, or differently, better or worse. They only had a belief that the future was clear. But of course, we know that beliefs that the future is clear are usually what they write case studies about, or businesses that fail. All right, putting that aside, all businesses are both all strategy is both deliberate and emergent. Let's go to number 5. Use agile strategy framework design. What does this mean? First, we have to clarify which aspect of agile are we talking about. An agile organization? No. It's a good thing, but that's not the topic for design. Agile techniques, Scrum, also great, can be useful in many places in strategy design perhaps, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking here about agile design philosophy. And that design philosophy that came out of software design, is the idea of creating a minimum viable design first and then evolving it. So in software, the problem was they would build software and then launch it, and it would have all kinds of problems because they never got the feedback from the customers. They never got feedback from the supply chain, and it doesn't work. And they had to get to the point where they start small and evolve over time. The agile design philosophy is inherently adaptive and emergent. Let's talk about it. So here's some pictures that we can use to describe the difference between an agile and a non-agile design. Instead of a cascade like this, okay, first we're going to define our aspiration. Then we're going to do market research and diagnose and all that stuff and get our scenarios and strategy plans, metrics, and then we'll be done. And we go in order. And often this is done on a schedule where there is a set sequence. What would be an agile difference? It would be to create as much of the framework as you need to think about it as a whole, a minimum essential draft. And then work and revise that draft over and over until it's good enough. Just like the software started with a minimum essential working app, and then revised and revised with customer feedback, people using it until it was good enough. Here's, sequential steps and cascades are very common in the strategy industry. And I'm not saying that there aren't good things involved with some of them, but they're very complicated, and the stepwise process really causes problems. And I'm proposing a very simple process here of this minimum essential concept that has evolved and then declared good enough. A wonderful tool for this, a wonderful technique for doing agile strategy design is this little picture in here, and that's a strategy alternative matrix, where you look at alternative strategy frameworks. Here's all of our framework components, and we compare them, and we have fitness criteria by which we judge them. And then we make assessments of these alternatives versus fitness. And we draft a rough one and then stress it with design principles and discussion and research and all the things we need, and slowly but surely it evolves. Here's how it look in practice. Here's a very rough minimum viable matrix. We have alternatives, we've got an aspiration, we've got bottleneck, a few other elements of the framework. And then we got our judgment of how we're going to decide which one has greatest potential, which one has the greatest barriers, which one has the greatest speed, all the things we would care about. Short-term money, long-term money, investment, CapEx, all the things that we would judge one strategy alternative versus another. And over time, you evolve it. And you evolve it with all the things we know about. This is stressing it. And stress comes from a word from evolution where you're stressing an individual, in this case, a matrix, to evolve it, to make it more fit over time as you go through generations. One other thing I want to add here is not only give all the relevant people inside and out of the organization a chance to weigh in, give AI a seat at the table too. It's just fantastic the way you're able to ask it questions like, how would you judge a strategy for this or that? What criteria would you use? Assessments, how would you assess whether this will be successful? But at a detail level. And the best way to think about it, at least my experience so far, is treat it like another person. Ask them the questions you would ask other people. And they can bring in ideas that you would never expect. And of course, they have access to ideas and information that, orders of magnitude beyond what any group of people could have. You can also evolve the triad. We've talked about how important this strategy bottleneck triad is, aspiration triad is, and that they're the key terms of a strategy framework. Triad is like the smallest statement of the strategy framework that you could make that would have meaning. So it's minimum viable. And here's doing it on a Miro board. Starts with just some basic ideas, but you have examples of all three categories. Then it gets worse. You're fighting it out. You're deciding what to do. The dark ones are more high level. The light ones are subsets. And then it evolves. And then you come down and you finally might get to something. This is a terrific way to get a process started. I liken this agile design process to solving a puzzle. And it's a messy puzzle. And you'll never have all the pieces. And pieces change shape. They won't all fit together properly. And when it's done, it won't be crystal clear. You just want to get clear enough that you have something, that you have a strategy framework that has some meaning. Contrast this with a puzzle where you would say, I'm not going to do anything else until I know where this piece goes. you would never do it. You have to work a puzzle as a whole. Of course, you start with hints, but it's still the whole that matters. I want to mention Angus Grundy. You can find him on LinkedIn, has been developing Miro board templates. And Chris Fox is incorporating the strategy alternative matrix into his application, his strategy app called StratNav app. You can find Chris and Angus easily, or check in with me and I'll get you to them. Number 6, don't start with the usual strategy suspects. What do I mean by this? How many times do we start a strategy process with this kind of stuff? And Mark Blackwell, who's going to speak later, is someone who has always reminded me of this. Don't start with all this stuff because you don't really know what you need to know yet. And it takes so much enormous time. Wait for questions to answer before you go doing all this and finding this data. By the way, Roger Martin also stresses this very much, to not start with the data. And I believe your best way to start is to ask, what are you trying to do? And why can't you just go do it? Which, of course, is the bottleneck. And do we have any ideas? These questions, and when you start digging into these, they lead you to deeper questions. They lead you to a matrix. Then you start saying things like, well, you know, we can't answer this until we do competitive analysis. We can't answer this until we do 5 forces or a SWOT, or until we look at our historical growth data, whatever the data might be. But get a question and then go and get all this data if you ever need it. Frankly, half the time, very little of it is used, in my opinion. The next few improvements are pretty quick, and they continue also to describe techniques. Number 7, write less. Right? Debate, research, experiment, and struggle more. How many times have we seen a strategy process sprawl over 100 PowerPoint slides? Or in the process where they write everything down that everybody says without filtering it, without categorizing it, without giving it a purpose. The idea here is, don't let the strategy matrix get beyond 1 page, but debate it, fight it, learn what everybody thinks those words mean, struggle with it. And the fight word I'm using purposely because I think many strategy programs suffer because people want to be nice and they don't want to have the harsh conflicts that really exist. And they don't surface them. They keep them behind the scenes, and the truth never comes out about it. Making change and innovating is a harsh thing. You have to face up to the conflicts. So like an image I want to create for this is that on the left-hand side are kind of the design principle questions that you need to ask to evolve your matrix. And all this is laid out in great detail for you in the book. But it's really this messy version that's the truth that we want. It's fighting it out, and it's going to be a mess, and it's going to be ugly, and it's going to take time. But tell me the truth. Is there another way to figure out how to make change and innovate? I don't think so. How many strategy processes, because they're neat and clean and stick on a schedule, just end up confirming everything that people think they know already? Number 8, eradicate the word strategic. Now, I know this is going to sound foreign, but let me explain. There is no such thing as a strategic priority. Why? Because there's no such thing as a non-strategic priority. It is a word that adds absolutely no information. Now you might say, okay, well, what about strategic goals? Aren't they different from regular goals? Yes. Yes and no. Why not instead describe your goals in jargon-free language? Say whether it's a long-term goal or a short-term goal. Say if it's a market goal or a product goal or a new goal. Say if it's, say if it's a very difficult goal. Say if it's encompassing for the whole company versus just for part of the company. Use real language. Don't use jargon. What happens is these words like strategic end up creating noise and giving the illusion, they give the illusion that there's real thought behind it. But really, it's just a short way to make something sound important and smart. Take away this jargon. You're better off with it. Don't let your consultants use it. And if you're a consultant, don't let the people use it. You'll be amazed how when you force people to say what these things are without the word strategic, how it makes them think harder. And now on this theme, a tool that will help you eradicate not only words like this, but many others is what's called the 5 disqualifiers. So number 9 is apply the 5 disqualifiers habitually. And they're up here. And what are they? They are 5 tests of strategy and other components too that enable you to very quickly, in many cases, judge whether a strategy statement is really behaving and functioning as a strategy statement such that it will give guidance to the organization for making decisions and taking action. And the 5 disqualifiers are the opposite numbers, duplicate, excluded, and list tests. And what's different about these tests from ones you might have heard about is that a yes means you fail. So if the opposite is absurd, you fail. And what it will show is that most and many strategy statements are actually aspirations, or in the worst case, cliches or truisms. Our strategy is to maximize financial return. Well, what's the opposite of that? Minimize financial return. It's absurd. It gives no guidance. It's a cliche. It's not even useful information. And of course, is it a list? We talked about the lists of goals and sub-goals and initiatives and plans masquerading as a strategy. I think you'll find these disqualifiers are actually not only very handy, but fun to use and can really help a group discussion. And what you'll find is that all of these words that are commonly found in strategy statements are actually not strategies at all. If you see these words in the strategy, it's probably not a strategy. Goal, maybe. Some of these are reasonable aspiration statements, but sometimes cliches. But don't use them in your strategy statements. All right. Last but not least, make execution adherence, not results. Another thing that might be considered unusual. What are typical definitions of execution? Well, a simple one is that we're implementing, i.e. we're not designing anymore. Now we're walking down the road and implementing our strategy framework. Sometimes it's operational efficiency. That's just a different concept. I don't think that is a general concept. Same as strategizing. Roger Martin, I don't know why he goes there, but it's kind of weird. Seizing opportunities. Donald Sull says, well, that's execution. Well, you can only know if you've seized opportunities till after you've seized them. So that kind of puts execution as not very interesting concept because you can't know until it's all over. Same with getting excellent results. And frankly, most of the way people use the term execution is no better than getting excellent results. I want to define execution as injecting the energy, both mental and physical, to adhere to your strategy framework and change it when triggered. Your strategy framework is what you say. It's your hypothesis as to what has to be done, what has to be followed in order to achieve the aspiration you've set. So why wouldn't following it be the key to success? And this goes into the 4-station dashboard, where we're no longer just measuring results as very typical, or even kind of progress measurements, ratios and things that indicate results. It might be a little better of a leading indicator. But do we measure adherence to tactical policy? Do we measure adherence to all the rules we've agreed? Do we measure adherence to the strategy that we're going to lengthen product development time and invest in cost reduction using that time? And then foundation is, have we audited whether our strategy assumptions are still valid, our scenarios, our framework in general? The further you go to the left here, the more you are a leading indicator. And here's just a little more detail on the 4-station dashboard. And when you can answer no, is everyone executing? Is everyone adhering? Is the foundation still valid? That's when you have to agree to do something about it and modify the framework again. And that's what this picture shows, that every time you implement till triggered, you have to modify the framework every time you find a big enough fallacy in it by monitoring on your dashboard. Okay, that's the 10 improvements I propose will help practitioners in the short term.
So it's a great session. I really enjoyed hearing a few very critical improvements, what is required for the strategy. So wonderful thing. This 5 disqualifiers is something is amazing. You ask questions on why and why not. That is something is an eye opener. It's a fantastic event, sir. And the approach of emergent approach, like strategy and then bottleneck and aspiration, it's also very easy to understand. It's not something very complicated. It's a common sense. Okay, and you made it really a robust framework for everybody to understand very easy. I think everybody who wants to know more, they can read the book, Emergent Strategy, Emergent Approach, the Strategy. Okay, so I read it. I really liked it, and we are fortunate to have Dr. Peter here. Sir, we have a few minutes. I ask the participants to have any questions specific to the emergent approach or any other question related to the strategy. Please post your questions. And meanwhile, sir, what are the key takeaways? How can we implement now? So we understand that in uh, 10 things we need to know. Then what next? What is your advice? So let a typical mid-size organization, a manufacturing logistic companies, which is the main focus of the event today at least. So what do you advise? So how can they take it forward?
Well, I didn't try to create here a tutorial on the method that you can get in the book and on emergentapproach.com. There's task sets that help you, and we're developing some webinars and things that will help give you the hints about how to get going. But I think if you follow the book and follow the task sets on the website, you can get started. You can get started very quickly. And as I repeatedly said, I really think you can get a far way with this simple triad. And I showed a picture of doing it on a Miro board. You can do it in PowerPoint very easily. Where was that? Here. You possible aspirations, possible bottlenecks, possible strategies. You wouldn't believe how much comes out of this simple process. But it does take a certain amount of skill. You have to learn what are the guidelines for establishing bottlenecks, for figuring out which are the true ones. And chapter 14 has details on that and several examples. You also have criteria about what a good aspiration is. And obviously, you've got the tests of strategy. So I recommend, in the absence of other things, you could even just start with a very simple triad like this. And you can put it as part of your normal strategy process. Start with this and then see where it fits in. But this is also a very easy way to engage your clients, because you get them talking. What's in the way? Why can't you just do this? Right? You want to grow? Well, go ahead and grow. Why can't you do it? Well, I don't know. Well, could it be the right people? Could it be you don't have the right reputation? Could it be you don't have a product? Could it be blah, let's talk about it. Keep it on one page. Don't let these things sprawl out, because what traditionally happens is you start asking everybody, let's write down all the things we need to do to grow. And then you've got nothing.
Fantastic way, sir. So keep everything simple and in one page. So I think it's very, very key takeaway for all the participants. So we have a few more minutes. I think the topic is so interesting and challenging at the same time. Sir, one question I keep getting from the audience is, people, you already told in the beginning that you don't spend too much time on the industry analysis. What is the market share? What is the
Let's go to that slide.
yeah? You already told about it, and that's very important. And traditionally, what we see is wherever we go for the strategy consulting or strategy management thing, so people talk about what is the industry numbers. So is that something? It looks ridiculous. Okay. Yeah, you very well explained. Can you just give an idea for the, so that the companies can understand what it is?
I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but I want to highlight that the word is don't start with the usual suspects. I'm not arguing against any of this. It could all be very important. What I'm saying is that generally in a strategy process, you don't know what's important yet, because you haven't determined what the questions are. And that's why I'm so driven to get people to start with the questions of that triad. Can we really say what we're trying to do? You know, if it's a yearly strategy process, then you don't even ask the question, oh, we're doing strategy, right? But we know that yearly strategy processes are ridiculous. They're budgeting processes. And, but if you're going to invest in the time to develop strategy, you have to articulate why. What's wrong? What do we need to change? Or what opportunity is there that we're not getting and that we could get? And then immediately, this is the magic, as I said, this is the magic. What is in the way of getting what we want? Then you might start to say, well, we need this, or we need this, or whatever you want to say ends up being the right analysis. Let the data come from questions, not the other way around.
Cloud banking revolutionize the financial industry. So this agenda.
We
So we
have
are
two
talking about
questions.
co-banking key functions, importance of co-banking, challenges in traditional co-banking and cloud banking.
Can I take it up? Deep, can you flash this question?
I saw a question of resistance to people not wanting to change. That's, was that the question?
There is a third question. There is two more questions.
That is a wonderful question and one that we're talking more and more about. I do want to go back to the bottlenecks, because you need a strategy in that case, don't you? Did I go too far? I'm sorry. I think it's number 3, right? Here we go. You know, culture, you need a strategy to get people to change. Strategies aren't just about business models. In fact, in many cases, business models are fixed. You know your business model. It's how can you do it? How can you mobilize the people? That's where your strategy may be. How do we get better? You need to ask what's in the way. Why don't they want to do it? Are they sick and tired of strategy methods? They don't believe in them? Does the strategy person involved not have prestige? Do you not have a method? Does the big boss not want to play? You've got to figure out what's in the way and you got to go after that. So it's a great question. But what I think some people forget is that you need a strategy. You need a way to address the bottleneck to people that don't want to change or don't want to participate in a process.
Pete, if I can just add on that.
Mark, please. Yeah.
Capture one of the messages that are going to come later in the session. And of course, the great beauty of the triad is its simplicity and accessibility, which means people can get engaged in the strategy process. One of the major reasons why people resist change is that they haven't been part of the process and they have something dumped on them. So why on earth should they accept it? But the beauty of this approach, of this elegant simplicity, is it engages people and allows them to collaborate, and it's going to really increase your probability of getting buy-in.
Mark, thanks for raising up the issue of that the people weren't involved, because that's another very important answer to the question, how do you get people to want to change? And if you look at chapter 11, there's a section called extend in time to make it the people's design. And what my point there is that, and I'm not the first person to say this, obviously, that people who are part of the design process are the best people to execute it. They're the best people to carry it forward because they have emotional buy-in and they have awareness of what it means and why. So that's another key part, is involving them. Now, if you can't get them to play in the process, that's a different bottleneck. I saw another question. It was, I just saw it and then it went away. The questions flash and then they disappear. Can someone put it back up?
Can you flash the question if possible?
No, it's there in the chat. You have to just click on the chat icon on the bottom right. You can see all the questions.
Oh, that's my problem. I'm not chatting.
You want to
How
distribute it
important?
right now?
One second.
अभी
Let
कट करो.
me just 1 minute.
I see the question, how important is the design of the strategy workshop done with the leadership team? This is also a really good question. Sometimes I don't know that it's good to do the first session with the leadership team. What you may want to do in the beginning is find people who have like thought process and who are sympathetic to both the need to enter into the strategy discussion and in the way you want to do it. And maybe sometimes you're better off, as we say, cooking a frog. And people know this concept, you know, dripping a little bit at a time on people until they're ready to accept it and have some confidence. There's other ways you can bring in people who can explain it and give examples and things like that. There's a lot of ways to address it, but what I would say definitely is that it's not always the best thing to do to start with a big splash and get everybody in the room and say, here's what we're going to do. Sometimes it's better to bring it in slowly.
Okay. Okay. So there is one question from Pankaj. The book discusses leveraging uncertainty rather than fearing it. So the question is, what practical advice would you give to organizations looking to embrace uncertainty in their strategic planning?
Another great question. Could I phrase it in this sense that uncertainty, you know, okay, let me say it this way. Has anybody heard the term planning under uncertainty? I mean, you know, okay, show me a business that you're going to plan without uncertainty. I'd like to know the stock ticker, you know? There is no such thing as planning in a certain, planning under uncertainty is a meaningless statement because there's no such thing as planning with certainty. If there was, none of us would have a job. There'd be no meaning to anything, right? So I think that the leveraging of uncertainty is the second word you had there, Pankaj, is don't fear it, face it, know that it's there. Don't treat it like an afterthought. Make it inherent in the process. And we didn't talk about it because, of course, we only had short time here. Use scenarios. It's a big part of the framework, and they're in chapter 13 and also in the task sets online, emergentapproach.com. Scenarios are a very powerful way to think about uncertainty, to say, we know that there's plausible futures that are different than we're expecting out there. And we have to ask ourselves whether or not that should influence our strategy design.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you very much.
So thank you. I think any last question?
I love this last one. Could I respond to this last one? It's a little bit related to the other one, right? About involving the leadership team. Top management needs desperate simplicity, but I'm showing it as a big mess. How do you solve this paradox? I got to come back to that strategy matrix, even more so than the triad, is a wonderful way to communicate with leadership. You show them strategy alternatives and then show them how you judge them and why you would judge one better than the other, and then how you make that assessment. This is a way to engage them with a simple process. 1 page. Don't ever let it get beyond 1 page. Work them through it. This is a great technique to hiding the mess from them at first and showing them the working concept. That's the agile concept. We're gonna get this thing close enough that we could show it to leadership and get their feedback on it. I think that strategy matrix, of course we could have a whole session just on the strategy matrix. And you get, there's quite a bit on it in part 2 of the book and in the task sets online. But I think it's a wonderful communication tool. It's not a calculation tool as much as it's a communication tool, and a wonderful communication tool with top management.
Okay. So that's great. Any last question? Anybody want to ask a last question? So with that, Dr. Peter, thank you very much. Any final note for the industries with this in the arena of change, with all this infrastructure, the wars and the technology changes? So what do you advise, the final advice, just to key takeaway for them?
Well, I think on that topic, the concept of scenarios. Don't plan how the future is going to be. We call this multiple futures. We don't know what interest rates are going to be. We don't know if the war in Ukraine is going to end. We don't know what's going to happen to the Middle East. We have a new government in the States that's changing a lot so far. You don't know. Use scenarios and then ask yourself, are we robust to these futures? Just make it part of the thought process. Again, scenarios is a whole topic on its own as well. But I like to get it in people's heads that scenarios is a way of keeping yourself from thinking you know what the environment is going to be going forward.
Fantastic, sir. So just plan your strategies and make sure that you do the scenarios ready with you. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much for a wonderful session, really insightful session, and it's a great learning experience. Maybe we will reach you to have the approach to automate into our solution as well, along with Chris Fox. Okay. So maybe
well, thank you for having me, and I wish you to have a great 3-day summit.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, and have a great time.